Her cousins got millions. She got a flooded cellar and a map no one understood. But what she discovered in the wreckage of her inheritance wasn't about money. It was about a debt that could never be repaid. If you've ever felt like you were left with the scraps while everyone else got the feast, then this story is for you. Hit subscribe and stick with me, because sometimes the most broken things hold the most value. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to exist, at least on paper. For 6 years I had been a file, a case number, a series of reports in a beige cabinet in a beige office. I was Ilara Vance, Ward 7B, due for mandatory emancipation on her 18th birthday. The air in the group home that morning was the same as it always was, thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and the quiet desperation of 6 other girls who were counting down their own days. My final meeting with Mrs. Albright was in her office, a room so small the filing cabinet seemed to be leaning in to listen. She sat behind her metal desk, a fortress of paperwork between us. She had a kind but tired face, the sort of face that had seen too many girls like me walk out the door, blinking in the sudden sunlight of a future they weren't prepared for. "So, Ilara," she said, tapping a pen on a stack of forms. 18. It's a big day." I nodded, my hands tucked under my legs. The chair was plastic and cold. I'd been given my final allowance in a thin white envelope, a bus pass, and a list of shelters and youth resources. It was the standard issue freedom package. "Do you have everything?" she asked. I thought about the single cardboard box in my room. It held a few changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book my grandmother used to read to me, and a small, smooth stone I'd found on a beach when I was 7. "Everything." "Yes, Mrs. Albright." "Good, good." The pen tapped faster. This was the awkward part. The moment where the system that had been your entire world for years simply lets go. There's no ceremony, no handshake, just a signature on a dotted line. "There's one more thing," she said, pausing her rhythmic tapping. She slid a different envelope across the desk. It was heavy, cream-colored, and looked completely out of place among the government-issue manila folders. My name was written on the front in elegant, unfamiliar handwriting. "This came for you, from a law firm." I picked it up. It felt impossibly heavy. A law firm? I had no one. My parents were a faded memory, and my grandmother, the only real home I'd ever known, had died 8 years ago. Her death was the event that had put me on the path to this very room, this very chair. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, honey. They just said it was imperative you receive it on your 18th birthday." She gave me a look that was part professional curiosity and part genuine concern. "It's about your grandmother's estate." The word felt foreign. Estate. It sounded grand and important, something for people with oil paintings and family crests. My grandmother June had lived in a tiny, wind-beaten cottage on the coast. She had a garden full of stubborn vegetables and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She didn't have an estate. She had a life, and then she didn't. I held the envelope on the bus, the city blurring past the rain-streaked window. The bus was crowded, full of people going somewhere, to jobs or homes or families. I was just going. The address was for a building downtown, one of those glass and steel towers that scraped the clouds. It felt like walking into a different country. The lobby was all marble and silence, the only sound the soft click of my worn boots on the polished floor. I felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace. I was an hour early for my appointment, so I just sat on a hard bench and clutched the envelope, a fragile shield against the imposing quiet. I was a ghost in this world of expensive suits and purposeful strides. Everyone who passed me had a place to be, a reason for their existence. I was just a girl with a cardboard box and a letter. The law firm of Davies, Finch, and Associates was on the 32nd floor, The view from the waiting room window was dizzying, the city spread out below like a circuit board. I stared at it, trying to feel something, anything other than the hollow fear that had been my constant companion for the last few years. A woman with a severe haircut called my name, and I was led into another office, this one lined with books. Mr. Davies was an older man, his face a kind map of wrinkles. He stood up when I entered, a gesture of respect that felt so unfamiliar it almost made me stumble. He didn't look at me like a case file. He looked at me like a person. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice calm and low. "I'm Arthur Davies. I was your grandmother's solicitor." He gestured to a leather chair opposite his own vast mahogany desk. "Please, sit." I sat on the very edge of the cushion, my box resting by my feet. He saw me glance at it. "You've come directly from the home?" "Yes, sir." "I see." He didn't say it with pity, just a quiet acknowledgement of fact. It was a subtle kindness that almost undid me. "Your grandmother, June, was a very determined woman," he began, folding his hands on the desk. "She made me promise that this meeting would happen on your 18th birthday, and not a day before. She was very specific about the terms of her will." He opened a thick folder. "Now, this may be a bit unorthodox." He cleared his throat. "Your grandmother's assets were modest, but what she did have, she divided. The liquid assets, the savings, the investments, totaling a little over $2 million after taxes, she has left to be divided equally among your cousins, Mark and Sarah." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Of course. Mark and Sarah. I hadn't seen them since the funeral. Their parents, my aunt and uncle, had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with the situation, which I understood to mean me. They had taken a few pieces of my grandmother's jewelry and disappeared from my life. $2 million. It was a number so large it was abstract. A fairy tale figure. "I see," I said, my voice flat. "It was the story of my life. Others got the feast. I got the crumbs." "However," Mr. Davies continued, looking at me over the top of his glasses, "she left you something else. Something she considered to be of far greater value." He slid a small, heavy wooden box across the desk. It was dark, polished wood with a simple brass latch. Next to it, he placed a single, ornate iron key. "She has left you her property, the house and the 3 acres of land it sits on at Heron's Point." My heart gave a painful lurch. The house. The place where I had last felt safe. The place I had been torn away from. The property. "Yes, free and clear. The deed is in this box, along with some other items she left for you." He paused, his expression turning serious. "I must be frank with you, Miss Vance. The property has been vacant for 8 years. It's fallen into a significant state of disrepair. The local council has issued notices. The taxes are current, paid from a small trust June set up for that exact purpose, but that trust is now depleted. Furthermore," he hesitated, "your cousins, through their solicitor, have already made an offer." "An offer?" "A development corporation has been buying up land along that stretch of coast. They've made a very generous offer for your grandmother's plot. Your cousins are eager to sell their share, which of course they do not have. The offer is for the entire property. They are offering you $50,000 for your signature." $50,000. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. It was a new life, an apartment, new clothes, a chance to go to college. It was an escape. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper and walk away from a derelict house I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. "Why would they offer so much for a rundown house?" I asked. Mr. Davies leaned back. "Because the house isn't what they want. It's the land. It's one of the last undeveloped waterfront parcels in the county. To them, it's not a home. It's a line item. They want to tear it down and build luxury condos." He looked at me, his gaze steady. "Your grandmother's instructions were clear. The choice is yours. and yours alone. You can sell, take the money, and start a new life. Or you can take this key and go see what she left you. He pushed the box and the key a little closer. The wood was cool beneath my trembling fingers. $50,000 was a door to a new life. But the key was a door to my old one. The bus ride to the coast took 4 hours. I watched the city's sharp angles and gray concrete bleed into the soft, rolling green of the countryside. With every mile, the air seemed to change, growing heavy with the smell of salt and damp earth. I had the wooden box on my lap, my hand resting on it as if it were a living thing. I hadn't opened it yet. It felt too final, a sacrament I needed to perform in the right place. The bus dropped me at a crossroads with a single, rusted sign that read, Port Blossom. It wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one, a general store with a sagging porch, a post office, and a handful of houses huddled together against the wind. The sky was a sheet of bruised purple, and a fine, cold mist was beginning to fall. I remembered this place, but as a child remembers things, a patchwork of sensations. The taste of the saltwater taffy from the general store, the cry of the gulls, the constant, shushing sound of the sea. The walk to Heron's Point was 2 miles along a narrow, cracked asphalt road. No one offered me a ride. No cars passed at all. The world felt empty, washed clean by the coming rain. The mist thickened into a steady, soaking drizzle. My thin jacket was useless against it. By the time I saw the turnoff, a dirt track almost swallowed by overgrown brambles, I was cold and wet and filled with a profound sense of dread. What was I doing here? The $50,000 felt like a warm, safe room I had foolishly walked away from. The path to the house was a battle. Thorny branches snagged at my clothes, and my boots sank into the muddy ground. And then the trees parted, and I saw it. The house was worse than I had imagined. Much worse. It stood on a small bluff overlooking the sea, a skeleton picked clean by the wind and rain. The porch roof sagged dangerously, one of its posts rotted through and collapsed. Shingles were missing from the roof like lost teeth. The paint had been scoured away, leaving the wood a pale, ghostly gray. The garden, once my grandmother's pride, was a riot of weeds and thorns. It didn't look abandoned, it looked defeated. For a moment, I just stood there in the rain, the box clutched to my chest, and felt a grief so sharp it was like a physical blow. This was the home I had carried in my memory for 8 years, a warm and perfect sanctuary. This wreck was a betrayal. I almost turned around. I almost walked back down that muddy track, back to the crossroads, back to a world where $50,000 could buy you a life. But then I looked at the iron key in my hand. It was heavy, real. It was a promise. Taking a deep breath, I pushed through the gate, which groaned in protest, and walked up the 3 rotting steps to the front door. The keyhole was stiff with rust. I had to put my whole body into it, turning with both hands until, with a loud grating crack, the lock gave way. The door swung inward on a single, screaming hinge, opening into darkness. The air that rushed out to meet me was thick and cold, a foul mix of damp, decay, and something else. The smell of trapped time. I stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind me, plunging me into near total darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Hello?" I whispered, and the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence. My eyes slowly adjusted, and shapes began to emerge from the gloom. Furniture lay shrouded in white cloths, like a room full of ghosts. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light slanting from a grimy window. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floorboards. It was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just bigger. I pulled the sheet off a sofa. The floral pattern was faded but familiar. I had napped on this sofa, my head in my grandmother's lap. I moved through the small downstairs rooms like a diver exploring a shipwreck. The kitchen was a disaster. A leak in the roof had caused part of the ceiling to collapse, leaving a pile of sodden plaster on the floor. In the living room, I found the fireplace, the one where Grandma June used to tell me stories about selkies and storms. And then I found the door to the cellar. It was at the back of the kitchen, half hidden behind a rack of empty preserving jars. I hadn't been allowed down there as a child. "Nothing for you down there but spiders and darkness," June used to say with a wink. The doorknob was cold and slick. It turned easily. I pulled the door open and was hit by a wave of musty, stagnant air. I couldn't see anything. I fumbled for a light switch, but my fingers just met damp, peeling wallpaper. My phone had a flashlight. I pulled it out, its bright, clinical beam cutting through the gloom. The light fell on a set of steep wooden stairs leading down. And at the bottom of the stairs, there was water. Dark, still water, reflecting the beam of my phone like a black mirror. The cellar was completely flooded. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped my lips. Of course. A flooded cellar. It was perfect. A perfect metaphor for the inheritance I'd been given. A broken house, a flooded foundation. I was about to shut the door on it all, on the smell and the damp and the disappointment, when my light caught something on the wall just inside the doorway. Tucked into a small alcove above the waterline was a small metal box, the kind used for fishing tackle, and taped to the top of it was a piece of paper, folded and yellowed. A map. It wasn't a map of a country or a state. It was a hand-drawn map of the property, the house a simple square in the middle. But it was covered in strange symbols, lines, and numbers that made no sense. There were arrows pointing to the sea, concentric circles drawn around a specific point in the garden, and a series of cryptic notes in my grandmother's familiar, spidery handwriting. "Where the salt meets the sweet," one read. Another, next to a drawing of a bird, said, "Listen for the silent song." It was a child's treasure map. A joke. Anger, hot and sharp, flared in my chest. This was what she'd left me? A ruined house and a nonsensical puzzle? I turned away from the cellar, my light sweeping across the kitchen, and that's when I decided to open the wooden box Mr. Davies had given me. I needed a real answer, not a riddle. I sat on the dusty floor, placed the box in front of me, and lifted the brass latch. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were three things. The first was a thick stack of envelopes, tied with a blue ribbon. My name was on the top one. The second was a small battery-powered tape recorder, the old kind with the tiny cassette tapes. The third, at the very bottom, was the deed to the property, a formidable-looking document covered in official stamps and signatures. My name, Elara June Vance, was listed as the sole proprietor. I picked up the first envelope, my fingers trembling. The paper was thin, almost translucent. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was my grandmother's, as familiar to me as my own face. "My dearest Elara," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a woman grown. I am sorry. I am sorry for all the years I have missed, for all the birthdays without a cake, for all the scraped knees I was not there to kiss. I am sorry for leaving you to the care of strangers. Forgive me, but there was no other way." I had to stop reading, my vision blurred with tears. I hadn't cried at the group home. I hadn't cried in the lawyer's office. But here, in this dusty, broken house, her words had finally found the cracks in my armor. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. "I have left you this house, my love. I know what they will say about it. They will call it a wreck, a burden. Your cousins, bless their simple hearts, will see only rot and dollar signs. They will urge you to sell. Mr. Davies, a good man but a practical one, will lay out the sensible arguments for taking the money. It is a lot of money. It would give you a start, a clean one. No one would blame you if you took it. In fact, most of the world would call you a fool for not taking it. I looked around the decaying room, at the water-stained walls and the ghost-shrouded furniture. A fool. Yes, that felt about right. But I have left you this house not as a burden, but as a choice, a trust. The money I left your cousins is easy. It requires nothing of them but to spend it. I raised their father, my son, to value ease above all else, and I am afraid I succeeded too well. But you, Ilara, you were always different. You saw the things behind the things. You understood that a crooked shell held the sound of the ocean, that a plain-looking stone could be 1,000,000 years old. So I have left you something hard. I have left you a responsibility. The map, the letter continued, is not for a pirate's treasure, not for gold or jewels. The thing that is hidden here is more valuable and far more fragile. I couldn't protect it forever. Now it falls to you. The house will give you shelter, the land will give you roots, but the secret will give you a purpose. Don't trust the water in the cellar, my love. Some things are meant to be drained away to reveal what lies beneath. Start there. And listen to the tapes. Listen to my voice when you feel lost. I will be with you. Always. All my love, your Grandma June. I sat there for a long time, the letter in my hand, the silence of the house pressing in on me. A choice, a trust, a responsibility. These were not words I was used to. I had spent the last 8 years being told what to do, where to go, who to be. The idea of a choice this large, this real, was terrifying. I looked at the map again. Listen for the silent song, where the salt meets the sweet. It was still nonsense, but it was my nonsense. It was the only thing in the world that was truly mine. The flooded cellar. Start there, she had written. I got to my feet, my body stiff from the cold floor. I walked back to the kitchen, to the dark, foreboding doorway. I shone my phone's light down the stairs again. The water was black and uninviting. How was I supposed to drain a flooded cellar by myself? I had no tools, no money, no help. It was an impossible task. And yet, a tiny spark of something I hadn't felt in years, something stubborn and defiant, ignited within me. My grandmother had believed I could do this. She had chosen me. For the first time since I'd walked through the door, I felt a flicker not of grief, but of connection. This wasn't just a house. It was a message in a bottle, sent across 8 years of lonely sea. And I was finally here to receive it. I knew I couldn't do anything about the water tonight. It was getting dark, and the rain was coming down harder, drumming a frantic rhythm on the broken roof. I needed to find a place to sleep, a dry corner in this waterlogged world. Upstairs, the 2 small bedrooms were in better shape. One was clearly my grandmother's. A simple wooden bed frame stood against the wall, stripped of its mattress. The other room was mine. A small bed, a chest of drawers with seashells painted on the knobs. It was just as I had left it. My cardboard box from the group home looked small and pathetic in the corner. I unrolled the thin sleeping bag I'd been issued and laid it on the floor. It wasn't much, but it was a space. It was mine. Before I fell into an exhausted sleep, I pressed play on the tape recorder. There was a hiss of static, and then a sound that cracked my heart wide open. My grandmother's voice. Not writing, but speaking. It was warm, familiar, with that same wind chime laugh humming beneath the words. Tape 1, she said. For Ilara. If you're hearing this, it means you came. You chose the hard path. I knew you would. Oh, my brave girl, I knew it. Now about that cellar. I fell asleep listening to her voice, a lighthouse guiding me through the dark, stormy sea of my own fear. The next morning, I woke to a sliver of pale sun cutting through the grime on the window. For a split second, I didn't know where I was. The scent of salt and old wood was a disorienting comfort. Then the reality of my situation settled in, cold and heavy. Ruined house, flooded cellar, cryptic map. I was a cliché in a ghost story, but my grandmother's voice from the tape recorder echoed in my mind. I knew you would. That belief, coming from beyond the grave, was a stronger foundation than anything this house currently had. My first priority was survival. I used the last of my cash at the general store in Port Blossom. The man behind the counter, a Mr. Henderson whose name was embroidered on his shirt, eyed me with open curiosity. He had a face like a worn leather boot, kind but weathered. "You're June's granddaughter, aren't you?" he asked, ringing up my purchases. A bucket, a heavy-duty flashlight, rubber gloves, bread, and peanut butter. "I heard you were in town." News traveled fast in a place this small. "Yes," I said. "I'm Alara." "Haven't seen anyone up at that house in years," he said, packing my things into a canvas bag. "It's a shame what's become of it. Your grandmother loved that place." He paused. "There's a development company been sniffing around, sending letters, making offers. Some folks think it's a good thing. Progress." He said the word progress like it was a sickness. "What do you think?" I asked, surprising myself with the directness of the question. He looked out the window toward the sea. "I think some things are worth more than what a developer is willing to pay for them. Your grandmother thought so too." He handed me the bag. "The pump on the well out back should still work. June always kept it in good repair." It was a small thing, a piece of practical information, but it felt like a gift. A sign that I wasn't entirely alone. Back at the house, armed with a bucket and a sliver of hope, I confronted the cellar. It was a daunting task. The water was deep, at least 4 feet. Bailing it out with a single bucket seemed like a task for a mythological hero being punished by the gods. But start there was the instruction. So I started. I tied a rope to the bucket handle, lowered it into the black water, hauled it up, and dumped it out the back door. Over and over. The work was brutal, mindless, and strangely calming. Each bucket was a small victory, a physical manifestation of my will against the decay. As I worked, I listened to the tapes. June's voice was my companion, a steady stream of stories, instructions, and affirmations. "The water got in when the storm of 14 took out the seawall," she explained on one tape. "I never had the strength to fix it properly. The councilmen kept talking about a municipal project, but they were more interested in the offers from the developers. Easier to let a problem wash away a piece of history, I suppose." She told me about the map. "The circles in the garden, my love, they mark the old well. Not the one for the house, but the freshwater spring that feeds it. It's where the salt of the sea air meets the sweet of the earth. That spring is older than this town. It's why this land is so alive. A freshwater spring, on waterfront property. That was rare. That was valuable. Not just for money, but for life." The work went on for 3 days. My muscles screamed. My hands were raw. I ate peanut butter sandwiches and drank water from the well Mr. Henderson had told me about. It was the best water I'd ever tasted. On the 3rd afternoon, something changed. My bucket hit something solid. Wood. I shone my powerful new flashlight down into the much receded water. The tops of wooden crates were emerging from the gloom. As more water was removed, a world was revealed. The cellar wasn't just a cellar. It was a workshop. A sturdy workbench stood against one wall. Shelves lined the others, filled with jars and tools, all coated in a layer of muck. And in the center of the room, now sitting in only a few inches of water, were 3 large, sea-worn wooden chests, the kind you see in movies. They weren't treasure chests filled with gold. They were something else. Each one was stenciled with a name. Not a person's name, a boat's name. The Sea Sprite, the Wanderer, the North Star. My phone rang, the shrill electronic sound an intrusion from another world. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But some instinct made me swipe the screen. Is this Miss Alara Vance? The voice was smooth, professional, and held a note of impatient condescension. Yes, who is this? My name is Julian Croft. I represent North Shore Holdings, the development corporation interested in acquiring the property at Heron's Point. The pressure had arrived. I believe you've been made aware of our client's generous offer. I have, I said, my voice steady, surprising myself. Excellent. We'd like to expedite the process. Our offer of $50,000 is on the table, but for a quick, no-fuss closing, I'm authorized to increase it to $75,000. The number hung in the air. 2 days ago, that would have been my salvation. Now, standing in the muck of my grandmother's secret workshop, it felt like an insult. What if I don't want to sell? I asked. There was a pause. A dry, humorless chuckle came down the line. Miss Vance, with all due respect, what you have is a derelict liability. It's a teardown. We are offering you a significant sum for a piece of land that is, for all intents and purposes, worthless until it is cleared. The alternative is you being responsible for council fines, back taxes once the trust is gone, and the cost of demolition yourself. Our offer is not just generous, it's a lifeline. He was using the language of reason, of practicality. He was the voice of the world I had come from, the world that said my grandmother's house was a burden. My grandmother seemed to think it was worth something, I said, more to myself than to him. Yes, well, sentiment is a lovely thing, but it doesn't pay the bills, he said, his tone turning sharp. We've already acquired all the adjacent properties. Yours is the last piece of the puzzle. It's going to be developed, Miss Vance. The only question is whether you profit from that or get buried by it. I'll have the paperwork sent to your lawyer. You have 48 hours to accept the increased offer. The line went dead. I stood there, the phone in my hand, the smell of the damp earth in my nostrils. $75,000. 48 hours. Get buried by it. The words echoed in the silent house. It was one thing to choose the hard path when it was just an idea, a romantic notion from a letter. It was another thing entirely when the easy path was paved with that much money, and the hard path was covered in mud and threats. I felt small again, a girl in a ruined house, up against a corporation with a man named Julian Croft on the phone. What could I possibly do? What was in those chests that was worth more than a new life? I dropped the phone in my pocket and slid down the wall, my back against the damp stone. I felt the weight of it all, the exhaustion, the fear, the impossible choice. And for the second time since arriving, I cried. Not quiet, dignified tears, but big, ugly, gulping sobs. I cried for my grandmother. I cried for the little girl who lost her. I cried for the teenager who had been so alone. And I cried for the woman I was supposed to become, who had no idea what to do. The world was telling me to take the money and run. Every rational part of my brain was screaming it, but my grandmother's voice was a whisper in my ear. You saw the things behind the things. This is that moment, isn't it? The one so many of us face. The moment when the world offers you a simple, shiny, easy way out, and your heart, your gut, whispers that it's a trap. It's the moment you have to decide what you're really made of. If you've ever been there, at that crossroads, leave a comment below and just write, I know. You don't have to share the story, but I want you to know this community sees you. We've been there too. Now let's get back to the cellar. After the tears, there was a strange, hollow calm. The ultimatum from Julian Croft had clarified things. This was no longer a personal journey of discovery, it was a fight. Whether I wanted it or not, a line had been drawn in the sand, or in my case, the mud. I looked at the chests. They were the key. I had to know what was inside. The locks were thick with rust. I went back upstairs and rummaged through the kitchen, finding an old, heavy meat cleaver. It wasn't the ideal tool, but it would have to do. I wedged the tip into the rusted hasp of the first chest, the one marked Sea Sprite, and hammered the back of the blade with a rock. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space. After 10 minutes of brutal, jarring work, the lock broke. I lifted the heavy lid. The smell that rose from the chest was not of decay. It was of sawdust, ink, and old paper. The chest was filled, packed tight, with hundreds of leather-bound logbooks. I lifted one out. The cover was stamped with the name of a fishing vessel and a range of dates. I opened it. The pages were filled with neat, dense columns of handwriting. Dates, coordinates, weather conditions, and catch totals. It was a fishing log, a meticulously kept record of every single trip that boat had made over a period of 20 years. I opened another chest, the Wanderer. More of the same. Dozens and dozens of logbooks. The third chest, the North Star, was the same. I was sitting in a cellar surrounded by the entire recorded history of what seemed to be Port Blossom's fishing fleet for the last half-century. Why? Why would my grandmother hide this? It made no sense. This wasn't a secret that could stop a development company. It was just old paperwork. Defeated, I sat on one of the chests and put my head in my hands. This was it. The great secret. A library of fish. Julian Croft was right. I was a sentimental fool in a worthless house. I pulled out the tape recorder, needing to hear her voice, needing her to explain this. I fast-forwarded through the tapes I'd already heard, searching for a new one. I found a tape labeled The Library. Her voice came on, quieter this time, more serious. So you found the books, Ilara. I imagine you're confused. You're probably sitting down there, covered in mud, wondering why I filled your inheritance with old fishing logs. She paused, and I could hear the faint sound of the sea in the background of the recording. Those books, my love, are not just about fish. They are about a promise. When the big trawlers started coming, 20 years ago, the government made a deal with the small fishing towns like ours. They said the big boats would stay out of the protected breeding grounds, the coastal shallows that have sustained families here for generations. They drew a line on a map. They promised to monitor it. But they lied. Her voice was hard now, cold with an old anger. The trawlers came in the night, Ilara. They scraped the seafloor clean. They destroyed the nurseries. The catches for our local boats got smaller and smaller. Men who had fed their families from the sea for 100 years were going broke. They complained, but who listens to a small fisherman against a big corporation? Their claims were dismissed as anecdotal evidence. I looked at the logbooks surrounding me. They weren't just fishing logs, they were evidence. Old Man Hemlock, who captained the Wanderer, he started it, June continued. He kept 2 logs. One for the Port Authority and one for the truth. He recorded where he was, and he recorded where he saw the trawlers. The others started doing it too. It was a quiet rebellion. For 20 years, they documented the theft. They recorded every illegal incursion, every violation. When they died or retired, they gave their real logs to me. They trusted me. I was the town's librarian, you see, not just for books, for secrets. My breath caught in my throat. I stood up and picked up a logbook at random. I flipped through the pages, and there it was. A separate column I hadn't noticed before, labeled Sightings. And in it, a date, a time, coordinates, and the name of a massive factory trawler. A name I recognized from the news. North Shore Holdings, my grandmother's voice said, as if reading my mind. That's the name they go by now. They started as a fishing conglomerate. They destroyed the local industry, then bought up the fishing licenses for pennies on the dollar. And now they want the land too. They want to erase the scene of the crime. They want to build their luxury condos on the bones of the community they murdered. The puzzle pieces crashed together in my mind. The map, the cellar, the logbooks. It wasn't a treasure map. It was an evidence locker. And the house wasn't a house. It was a safe deposit box. The silent song wasn't a bird. It was the story of the fishermen who couldn't make themselves heard. where the salt meets the sweet, wasn't just a spring. It was the place where the town's bitter history met the hope for justice. They can't build here if the land is part of an official environmental investigation, June's voice concluded. And those books are the basis for one. Decades of data, irrefutable, but I was one old woman. I couldn't fight them alone. I needed someone with courage, someone who understood what was really at stake. I needed you, Ilara. This is your inheritance. It is the chance to give this town its voice back. It is a terrible, heavy gift, my love, and you do not have to accept it. You can burn the books, take the money, and live your life. There is no shame in that. But if you choose to fight, you will not be alone. The names in those books are not just names. They are families. They are still here. The tape clicked off. Silence. The choice was finally clear. It was never about a house. It was about a home. A whole community's home. I looked at my phone. The 48-hour deadline was ticking. $75,000. A clean start. Or a cellar full of dusty books and a war against a faceless corporation. It was the easiest and hardest decision of my life. I walked out of the cellar, leaving the chests open. I walked through the house, not seeing the decay anymore, but seeing the fortress it had been. I walked out the front door and stood on the bluff, looking out at the sea. The wind whipped my hair around my face, and for the first time, it didn't feel cold. It felt alive. I took out my phone. I didn't call Julian Croft. I called Mr. Davies. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice wary. "I received a call from Mr. Croft. He informed me of his new offer." "I'm not taking it," I said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I see," he said slowly. "May I ask why?" "Because my grandmother didn't leave me a house to sell," I said, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. "She left me a library, and I think it's time we filed a complaint." There was another, longer silence on the phone. I could almost hear the gears turning in Mr. Davies's legal mind. When he finally spoke, the professional reserve in his voice had been replaced by something else, a flicker of excitement. "A library," he repeated. "Miss Vance, I think you had better start from the beginning. And please, don't leave anything out." For the next hour, I sat on the porch steps, the phone pressed to my ear, and told him everything. The flooded cellar, the tapes, the chests, the logbooks. I explained my grandmother's plan, her quiet, 20-year act of sedition. As I spoke, I could feel the story solidifying, transforming from a confusing personal mess into a coherent legal case. It was a powerful feeling. Mr. Davies listened without interruption. When I was finished, he let out a low whistle. "June," he murmured. "That magnificent, stubborn woman. She never told me the details, just that the property was more than it seemed." He cleared his throat, all business again. "This is extraordinary. The sheer volume of data, collected over decades. It's a smoking gun. It's more than that. It's an entire arsenal." "So we have a chance?" I asked, my heart pounding. "A chance? Miss Vance, if these logs are what you say they are, North Shore Holdings doesn't just have a PR problem. They have a multi-decade criminal conspiracy on their hands. RICO statutes could apply. Environmental protection laws, both state and federal, the penalties would be astronomical." He paused. "But they will fight back. And they will fight dirty. They will try to discredit the logs. They will try to discredit you. They will paint you as a disgruntled, opportunistic girl trying to extort a respectable company." "I'm not after money," I said immediately. "I know," he said, and I believed that he did. "But the world doesn't. We need to be smart. The first step is to secure the evidence. I'll arrange for a bonded courier to come and collect the logbooks tomorrow. They need to be in a secure vault, immediately. Okay? Second, I'm filing an injunction against North Shore Holdings first thing in the morning, citing a pending environmental and criminal investigation based on newly discovered evidence. That will stop them from bulldozing the property, and it will get their attention. And me? I asked. What do I do? You, Miss Vance, are now the plaintiff, and you need to stay put. That house is no longer just a house. It is Exhibit A. It's the place the evidence was stored, curated, and passed down. Your presence there gives the story its soul. Can you do that? Can you hold the fort? Hold the fort. I looked back at the dilapidated house. It looked less like a fort and more like a ruin, but it was my ruin. I can, I said. The next few weeks were a blur of action. True to his word, Mr. Davies' injunction landed like a bombshell. Julian Croft called me once more, his voice stripped of its smooth condescension, replaced now with pure, cold fury. He threatened, he cajoled, he offered me $250,000. When I quietly refused, he told me he would bury me in legal fees and ruin my life. I hung up the phone and got back to work. While the lawyers battled in their far-off offices, my war was on the ground. I started with the house. I used the small amount of money I had left to buy cleaning supplies, wood filler, and cheap paint. I scrubbed away the grime of 8 years of neglect. I patched the hole in the kitchen ceiling with a piece of plywood. I cleared the garden, pulling weeds until my hands were blistered and bloody. With each task, I felt stronger. I wasn't just fixing a house, I was reclaiming it. I was making it a home. The work was slow, but I wasn't alone for long. One day, an old pickup truck rumbled up the dirt track. An elderly man with a face as weathered as the coastline got out. "You're June's girl," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Earl. I used to run the North Star." He was one of the names from the chests. He looked at the work I'd been doing. "Heard what you did. Heard you told the suits to go to hell." He nodded slowly. "Your grandmother would be proud." He didn't stay long. But the next day, he came back with 2 other men, their faces and names familiar to me from the logbooks and my grandmother's tapes. They brought their toolboxes. They didn't ask permission. They just started working. They fixed the sagging porch. They replaced the rotten shingles on the roof. They helped me haul the last of the stinking mud from the cellar and install a sump pump. They spoke little, but their presence was a constant, solid comfort. News of the lawsuit spread through Port Blossom. I became a local curiosity. When I went to the general store, conversations would stop. People would watch me. Some looked at me with suspicion, as if I was a troublemaker. But others, the older ones, the ones whose families had been tied to the sea for generations, looked at me with a cautious, fragile hope. Mr. Henderson from the store started giving me my groceries on account. A woman I didn't know left a basket of fresh vegetables on my porch with a note that just said, "For June's girl." The community, fractured and beaten down, was slowly, tentatively, beginning to remember itself. The house began to breathe again. The light coming through the clean windows seemed warmer. The smell of damp and decay was replaced by the smell of sawdust, paint, and baking bread. I had found a box of my grandmother's recipes, and, with a bag of flour left by one of my silent helpers, I began to bake. The simple act of creating something warm and nourishing in that kitchen felt like the greatest victory of all. The fight was far from over. The legal battle would drag on for years, Mr. Davies warned me. North Shore Holdings had deep pockets and an army of lawyers. But something had shifted. The story was no longer about a corporation against one girl in a broken house. It was about a corporation against a town. The logbooks were the heart of the case, but I was its face, and the house, my house, was its soul. One evening, I was sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun set over the water. The sky was awash in pink and gold. The sea was calm. For 8 years, I had been a transient, a number in a system, a person without a place. My only anchor had been the memory of a home that I thought was lost forever. I had come here looking for that home, but I had found something more. I found that home isn't just a place you inherit. It's a place you build. It's a place you defend. It's a choice you make every single day. My grandmother hadn't left me a ruin. She had left me a blueprint. She hadn't left me a burden. She had left me a purpose. The inheritance wasn't the house, or the land, or even the secret in the cellar. The inheritance was the choice. The choice to fight for something that mattered. The choice to turn a house into a home and a victim into a victor. The monetary value of this land, according to the developers, was immense. But its real value could not be measured in dollars. Its value was in the curve of the coastline, in the cry of the gulls, in the taste of the fresh water from the ancient spring. It was in the stories held in the logbooks and the quiet dignity of the men who had written them. It was in my grandmother's stubborn love for a place that the world had been all too ready to forget. I had come to Heron's Point as a lost girl, haunted by the past. But in the process of rebuilding this house, I had rebuilt myself. The self-doubt was still there, a quiet hum beneath the surface. But now, it was accompanied by a new sound, the steady, confident beat of resilience. I had learned that my story was not defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I chose to protect. The legal case would have its ups and downs. There would be more threats, more challenges. But looking out at the horizon, I felt a deep, unshakable peace. I was home, and I was ready for whatever came next. This whole journey taught me something profound. We are all given an inheritance of some kind. For some, it's money or property. For others, it's a legacy of trauma, a series of bad habits, or a story of loss. But no matter what we are handed, we have a choice. We can choose to be defined by it, or we can choose to build from it. We can sell it off for a quick and easy comfort, or we can do the hard work of turning it into something meaningful, something that is truly our own. What is the inheritance you're carrying? What broken-down house in your own life is waiting for you to pick up a hammer and begin the work of rebuilding? Think about that. And if this story, my story, has resonated with you, if it sparked something in you, then I hope you'll join our community. Subscribe to the channel. We tell stories for the people who choose the hard path, for the people who see the value in the broken things. And in the comments below, I want you to share one thing you've chosen to fight for in your life. It doesn't have to be a big, dramatic battle. It can be a quiet, personal war. The fight to be kind, the fight to heal, the fight to believe in yourself. I'll be reading every single one. Because your story matters. And here, in this community, you are not alone.